everybody. Welcome to this evening's forum on the Athens Cannabis Ordinance. My name is Mary Costello. I'm co-president of League of Women Voters of Athens County, and we work hard to provide opportunities for voters to learn about candidates and issues so they can make informed decisions at the polls. So tonight we're going to learn about the Athens Cannabis Ordinance, which is going to be on the ballot for Athens city residents. Before we get started, I want to thank the A News for sending a reporter. So there should be an article in the A News. Also, WOUB is here reporting, and it will be aired on the 6:30 Newswatch program sometime later this week, and it will also be recorded and be available on YouTube. And Ryan Schwartzhoff from the government channel is here, also recording this event, and that will also be available on YouTube. Is that correct?
And Facebook, and on the government channel and the city's website.
Okay, so there are many ways to access what goes on here this evening. So let people that you know they can find out what was said here tonight if they're interested and want more information before they make up their minds about how they want to vote. Before we get started, I want to bring your attention to a couple of things that are on the back table, some league literature. There is a card with information, supports for voters, and across the top is vote411.org. That's an electronic voter guide, which we have begun to participate in here in Athens. We have on that voter guide the city council races and the school board race. We don't have other things on there. At this point, another year we're going to have more races on it, but that's what we have on right now. However, in addition, when you scroll down, when you go to vote411.org, you put in your address, and then you can click on See My Ballot or some link that's obvious on that page that comes up. And when you scroll down on the next page that comes up, you'll see the state issues. Those are also on the vote411.org site. So you can find out information about those two state issues, the prescription drug issue and the victim rights issue. But also at the back table is a flyer that also has information about the two state issues with pros and cons. So you're welcome to take one of those. Finally, I would also on the back table is our membership brochure. I would encourage anybody who is interested in joining the League of Women Voters to take one of these. We would love to have your membership. We can always use more help. This candidate season, this election season, our local league hosted, well, this is the 10th event during the month of October. Typically, we've done 3, something like that. But there were so many competitive races around the county, and we are the League of Women Voters of Athens County, that we decided we needed to go out to the county communities and give an opportunity for township trustees, village council, mayors, village mayors to meet their voters. So we've been very busy this election season, and we would love to have more members so we can continue to be that busy every election season. So this evening, our pro speaker is Caleb Brown, our con speaker is Tracy Meek, and our moderator is Debbie Schmeeding. Before I turn it over to her, I want to remind you that there's paper and pencils. If you have a question, please write your question, hold it up, and one of our greeters will come and pick it up, take it back. We have 2 people who are looking over the questions, mostly just so we don't just send them up here and have them be duplicates, questions that have already been answered. So write your questions, hold them up, and we'll get them to the moderator. So thank you all for coming. Good evening. I would like to first start by introducing a little further our speakers who have been so kind to take their time to come. Caleb Brown, right here, has lived in Athens since 2010. He's the treasurer of the Cannabis Ordinance Committee, holds a master's degree in linguistics from the University of Iowa, and has done extensive work and research on issues related to local and statewide citizen initiative petitions and home rule in Ohio. Tracy Meek, who will present the con side of the issue, is a 2003 graduate of Ohio University and a 2006 graduate of Capital University Law School. In 2007, Tracy joined the Athens City Prosecutor's Office, and in 2015 was promoted to Chief Prosecutor. She lives in Albany with her husband and 4 kids. Our speakers will each have 3 minutes for an introductory statement, after which they will have 1.5 minutes to answer questions, and then we will wrap up with a 2-minute final. And by our very clever rocket science flip of a coin, chosen Caleb to start with his introduction.
Good evening, and thank you, Mary Costello and Debbie Schmeeding and the rest of the League of Women Voters for having us all down here and putting this on for everyone and for all the forums that you do. And also thank you, Tracy Meek, and everyone else for coming down tonight. I'm really glad to be here and to be able to talk about the Cannabis Ordinance. It's been a lot of work put in by a lot of people over the past few years. And if you have not heard of this before, it would propose to put a change to our city ordinance to lower the penalty for misdemeanor marijuana offenses to $0 in town. And there's actually a few handouts that are back there on that same back table. There's a info packet that has some history and context, as well as a complete text of the ordinance language, which is really just 1 page. So if you'd like to read that over, please feel free. The Athens Cannabis Ordinance is based on precedent from an ordinance they enacted in Toledo a couple years ago, and it was successful there, which means we can do it here, and really you can do it in any city in Ohio. I would like to start by saying a few words that were put by Chad Thompson, who wrote the original Toledo ordinance, in a brief to the Lucas County Court when they were defending the original Toledo ordinance. He wrote, "Governmental institutions are typically slow to accept changes in policy demanded by the people they serve. And that's why the Ohio State Constitution grants our citizens the power of initiative petition and home rule. If our legislature passes unjust laws, or laws that do not serve all Ohioans' wishes, or if laws become outdated, we should and do have the right to challenge them locally. And cannabis prohibition is perhaps one of those laws. Cannabis is known as medicine for millennia and proven in recent decades, and especially in the past few years, as medicine. It's a plant. Prohibition laws are outdated and known to be problematic, and cannabis is much less destructive than alcohol. If voters approve the cannabis ordinance, then we have basically shown our local government officials what we feel the policy for cannabis should be in our local community. I've heard a few concerns. One is that the cannabis ordinance might confuse some students or might not even affect campus at all. They did a cannabis ordinance in Ann Arbor 40 years ago, and it's been fine, doesn't confuse students, doesn't cause anyone to lose student aid. Moreover, I believe that the cannabis ordinance really should affect campus based on a recent court decision in Benton Township versus Rocky Ridge Development at the Ohio State Supreme Court, saying that a local ordinance is preempted only when a general law of the state directly conflicts with it, and TACO does not conflict with the state law. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to stand up. I'm just more comfortable standing up. First of all, I want to be real clear. I'm not necessarily here against this law. I know it says con, but the prosecutor's office, our role is not to take a stance on what laws should be passed or anything like that. Our role is to enforce the laws. So I want to be real clear that should this ordinance pass, our office will enforce this ordinance just as we do any other ordinance that the city of Athens has. And much of what Caleb said I agree with. I mean, I've done a little bit of research on the cases and the case studies of different cities that you talked about. To be perfectly honest, not too much, because I was not anticipating being here until just a few days ago, but I'll do my best. So, I guess the reason I'm here is to express our office's concerns about enforcing this law. We think that it will create, we do believe it will create confusion. I think we'll probably get some questions about that. And it creates, in our unique town with the university and with the city, so closely connected, yet they are separate entities, it's going to create unequal treatment between, if you are on campus and you possess marijuana, you're going to be cited one way. If you're across the street in the city, you could be cited another way, and the penalties are completely different. So whether or not all of you are informed voters, you've obviously taken the time to come here tonight to learn and to listen. I don't think we can say that for the 20,000 plus students of Ohio University. Many may be paying attention, but our fear is that they hear legalize marijuana, and that's what they think they're voting to do. And quite frankly, this ordinance cannot and does not legalize marijuana. The word decriminalize has been thrown around. I think it's important also, there's an important distinction between decriminalizing and depenalizing. You can depenalize the offense in as much as saying there's no fine associated with it and the city won't collect court costs. However, we can't not collect state mandated court costs. You just can't legislate around what the state mandates as far as court costs, which I think is in the family of $40. So it's substantially less than the court cost would be for something stated under the state, cited rather under the state code, but it doesn't decriminalize marijuana. You will still have a conviction that, as far as for your criminal record purposes, is a drug conviction. So that's why I'm here, just to kind of clear the air. Again, I'm not here to say, vote no. I'm here to explain from our office's perspective the concerns we have as far as the community, especially the student community's conceptions of the ordinance.
Thank you. Well, I don't see that we have any questions from the audience, so I'll pick. We do. I think on David DeWitt to give us the first question, shall we?
Okay, sure. You mentioned, Caleb, in your writing about how the proposal would act as an incentive or disincentive for law enforcement. So I wanted to hear from both of you as to your thoughts about how law enforcement might respond to this, and your hopes, for that matter, as well, as to how law enforcement might respond. Thank you.
All right. Well, Tracy mentioned something about unequal treatment in different parts of town, especially with campus versus the rest of the city. And as I mentioned in my introductory statement, I actually believe that from a Supreme Court case in Ohio that was decided about a month ago in Benton Township versus Rocky Ridge Development, that the Supreme Court decided that local ordinances that are not in conflict with state law, for example, the Cannabis Ordinance, are the preference in the jurisdiction where that ordinance is in effect. And my belief is then that the Ohio University Police Department would then be required to follow the ordinance when they're inside city limits, and also that and also I would like to point out that in the past couple years, the University of Toledo Police, which is also an Ohio Public University Police Department, have been following the will of the Toledo citizens within their campus enforcement, and they've not really been enforcing cannabis misdemeanors on campus at the University of Toledo either.
Yes, please. So the Ohio University Police Department controls Ohio University, obviously, and their property. That property is owned by the state. So offenses that occur on that property are cited under the Ohio Revised Code. They are not cited under the Athens City Code. That's not to say that an OU police officer on city property in the city's jurisdiction couldn't cite the municipal ordinance, but they generally don't cite within the city of Athens. I mean, that's the Athens City Police's jurisdiction, and Ohio University is Ohio University Police's jurisdiction. This ordinance would not affect the Ohio University Police. I understand maybe your point that they should pick up on the trend and they should change their enforcement method. And quite frankly, I can't speak to that. That would be a policy decision at the university level that we would have nothing to do with. Also, I think that's it. Well, I did have a conversation with Chief Pyle today, and he said, you know, let me back up. To put this all in perspective, in the last 3 years, there have been 25 marijuana citations written in the city of Athens. 25 in 3 years. In this calendar year, we're only at October 31st, there have been 475 cases charged by the Ohio University Police Department. So the number of people charges that this will affect is very, very, very small. So there's that.
Next question is for Tracy. Is there any reason a student from OU should support Taco?
I mean, I think as a nation we're marching towards the legalization of marijuana, and sure, I mean, if you want to depenalize marijuana, this is your opportunity to vote yes. Our fear as far as the students at Ohio University go is because of financial aid. Because as the law stands now, if you have a drug offense, which this would still be, even under a city ordinance, not just under the state code, it would be a drug offense and you have to self-report that on the application for federal financial aid, FAFSA. So if you report that, you may be making yourself ineligible for financial aid, which with the cost of college tuition these days can be catastrophic for someone who's in college. That's our concern. I mean, I guess I can't stand up here and say students should vote no just because they're by virtue of being a student, but they need to be informed about the consequences of having a marijuana charge, be it under the state code or under the city code. I'd also like to take this opportunity to tell you that when anybody is charged, anybody, be it a regular citizen or a student, their first drug offense for marijuana, we routinely amend to a disorderly conduct charge. Every time. Doesn't matter who you are. Because it takes it out of the drug category and puts it in a different category under the law. So when you go to fill out your financial aid, you don't have to report that you have a drug offense. It used to be a mandatory driving license suspension, which means that if you were driving down the road in a minivan like me, and 25 years ago I had a marijuana conviction, it would come up and say, drug offense on my driving record. So we wanted to avoid that.
What was the question?
The question is there any reason a student from OU should support Taco?
Well, I guess, to me, it's not really about decreasing the number of municipal citations. As Ms. Meek was saying, the Athens City Prosecutor's Office has been very, very progressive in terms of cannabis prosecution since the 90s by the plea bargain to the disorderly conduct instead of the drug charge. And I think that's great. And I think that, in fact, the Cannabis Ordinance really supports that action by our local prosecutor's office. If it were to pass, then it would be essentially the citizens saying that we think it's great that our prosecutor's office does that kind of plea bargain deal, and in fact it would be making it more possible to perhaps even go farther. I know that it used to be $150, and since the beginning of the year they've lowered that down to $50 for the disorderly conduct charges. So Athens City is progressive in itself right now. And as far as an OU student voting for the Cannabis Ordinance, I'm sure there are lots of reasons. To me, it's really about showing as a community, including the students who are a big part of our community, being able to make statement in a legal way about ending cannabis prohibition.
Thank you. I think this is, well, we'll see. I'll just toss it out. It's Caleb's first, but it may be more a question for Tracy. About how much money does the city collect every year from cannabis convictions?
I mean, that's probably something for Tracy, although you said it was very few.
Yeah, so just because there's so few cases cited under the city code, it's probably very, very minimal. I can't give you a dollar amount, I'm sorry.
25 times 40.
So that's the state court cost. So if we waive the city court cost, then the city would stand to make nothing.
Okay. I'm not sure if this is fair to either of our speakers either, but here we go. Isn't there a way to separate THC out for use of other things, example, epilepsy and muscle relaxation? Specifically, I think the Tracy's question first.
I have no idea.
Okay, well, I can actually speak to that. Our current Ohio State medical marijuana law actually is exactly that and provides for the use of extracts to treat specific illnesses, including ones like epilepsy. The Athens Cannabis Ordinance actually is a little bit different, and as I've said before, cannabis is accepted as medicine and has been scientifically proven to have therapeutic treatments for a wide range of illnesses, including ones that are not included in the short list that Ohio's doctors are allowed to prescribe cannabis extracts for. So yes, while it is possible and even legal in Ohio at this point to obtain THC extracts to treat diseases like epilepsy, it is currently illegal in Ohio to use whole plant cannabis or to smoke it to treat nausea or other less serious illnesses that it is indeed useful as treatment for. So the cannabis ordinance in Athens would open up people to be more able, with less penalty, to treat illnesses with medicine in a way that they know might work for them.
Thank you. Okay, we have a series of questions that I think all address relative jurisdictional issues. I think what I'm going to do is read them all, and if you can discern that there's difference between them, you can answer them as such. First one, will campus police have to follow state code or can they cite tickets under TACO? And I'll repeat any of these that you want. Does Athens Municipal Court adhere to the laws of the city? If cannabis is depenalized in the city of Athens, how can a state agency then charge under state law? Is a city ordinance law of the city or just a directive of local police? If the university charges a student under state law, is your office, I think this means yours, Tracy, not obligated to reduce the charge to the city ordinance in view of the Rocky River case? Should give me a pen tag. That's reading all this. Okay, and this is for Caleb to start, and since I've blasted you with 5 different questions, feel free to. If they need it. Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
This is probably one of the most complex topics to do with the cannabis ordinance because honestly nobody's really sure, and there have been a lot of opinions that I've seen come forward about whether city police are bound to follow the local ordinance, whether university police are bound to follow the local ordinance, whether they can choose to follow the local city ordinance or the state, or whether they must follow one or the other. My personal opinion is that I saw somebody mentioned the Rocky Ridge development case, which was where Benton Township had a local ordinance against doing various industrial activities, and Rocky Ridge Development came in and was like moving a bunch of fill dirt, and they said they were causing a nuisance, and it ended up going to the Ohio State Supreme Court. And there have been a lot of decisions back and forth about home rule in Ohio recently. Home rule, if you're not aware, is the notion that cities or even chartered counties can have the power to pass ordinances and regulate themselves on a local level in a way that the state might, maybe the state doesn't have as much experience in a local area or need to be regulating on a small level, and so then cities can pass their own regulations like that. So, for example, you might have heard about the Athens County Charter, and there have been a lot of decisions in the Ohio State Supreme Court about home rule as it applies to fracking and natural gas extraction and waste injection. And because the Ohio Department of Natural Resources is granted sole authority to regulate those things, the decision has been consistently that cities do not have the right to do home rule regulation over that kind of stuff. And that's been kind of the big story, but it's not the end of it, because that only really applies when the state is granting a directly conflicting regulation that is completely different from the local ordinance. Now, the Athens Cannabis Ordinance is essentially identical to state law, except with the fine amounts changed to zero. Cannabis would remain illegal in town, and if it had been in violation of state law, the state Supreme Court and the Attorney General would have challenged the other ordinances and kept them completely off the books. Instead, they survive. And House Bill 463 would have mandated that the local board of elections keep it off the ballot also. So after we've determined that it's legal, do you mind if I keep speaking since there were so many questions?
We'll come back. Why don't you stop?
Okay.
And then we'll come back. Good job, thank you.
That's a lot. Okay, first, I wanted to commend Caleb because I know this is no small undertaking, and again, state that I'm not here saying, oh, we really hope it doesn't pass. We're going to enforce whatever is passed. As far as the questions about the campus police versus the city police, on campus, the campus police cannot cite under the city code. They have to cite under the state code. They're bound by that. And just as a rule, except in very extraordinary, well, not very, but during fest season, during Halloween, then campus police might come patrol the city, but as a general rule, campus police patrol campus and the city police patrol the city. There are, I'll just use OVIs as an example, DUIs, driving under the influence. Any city police officer that cites someone in the city for an OVI still cites under the state code, the state law, only because the state law is changing so frequently. It just changed again with different license suspensions and things like that, that the city, it just logistically can't keep up with the changes under the state code to make the city's code consistent with it. So just as a matter of simplicity, they cite only under the state code for DUIs. So the city police, if this would be passed, they still have the option of citing either under the state code or under the city code. I can't tell you what the city police's policy may be. I don't know if they would make a policy or make a decision. Again, they just don't cite that many cases as it is, but they aren't bound to cite only under the city code. And in many instances, they cite under the state code because the state code is more up to date than what we have in the city ordinances. I don't know if I answered any of them.
No, you did a fine job. So, Caleb, would you like 30 seconds to finish up?
So just to finish up the thought, the police in a few different cities have responded differently. As Ms. Meek was saying, the police in a city have the option, or at least had, to cite under state code or city code as they saw fit. Although as I was explaining earlier, I believe that the Supreme Court case with Benton Township has changed that, which was just a month ago, but the decision in that case was that the local ordinance, if it's not in violation of state law, which the Athens Cannabis Ordinance would not be, it's just a slight modification at the local level, that the local ordinance would then prevail, and that could conceivably then include not just local law enforcement officers being mandated to follow that, but also state.
Oh, I'll just add one more thing. We've had discussions in our office about what would change in our office if this passed, and the answer is absolutely nothing. I mean, if someone was cited under the city ordinance and they came to us and said, look, I have this drug charge, we would still say, well, if it's your first offense, we'll amend it to a disorderly conduct. Our concern is that since it's such a small penalty and it's a minor misdemeanor and not a mandatory court appearance, the easiest way to resolve it would just be to go to the clerk's office window in the municipal court in the city building and pay your $40 and be on your way. And many people, more people than you believe, do that now just because they don't know the ramifications of a drug offense, and then they come to us a month later and say, oh my gosh, I have this is a drug conviction, and my attorney is telling me this is really bad. So, and then we try to undo it for them. But we would likely, I can say with certainty, if they were charged under the new city ordinance, we wouldn't change our practice at all, and we would still amend them to a disorderly conduct, probably under the city code.
Thank you. Are there further questions from the audience?
So if something happened under the city code, if this were to change, then is it not less likely that people would actually be ticketed? That's the idea behind this, so that less people would actually be seen by you or the judge or anything like that. That's the idea.
I understand. I think you came in late when I gave the statistic that only in the past 3 years, that's okay, only 25 people have been cited, in the past year 6 have been cited under the city code. So it's not a hotly enforced
I hear that
issue
a lot.
anyway.
That's something I hear a lot. That it's not a priority to us. And that is something that's a term that's thrown around very loosely. And that is something that is very uncomfortable, because if there were 17,000 arrests in Ohio, how could it not be a priority? If there's millions of dollars thrown towards this, how could it not be a priority? We know that that cannabis, is utilized as a tool to, search, seizure.
I'm going to interrupt you and suggest, I think Tracy did not use the word priority. I think it was just the reality of the number of citations.
Right.
I don't think there was any statement that it wasn't a priority. So,
if we could address that, I would, because that is continued to be used, that term around this.
I can respond to that.
Yeah.
This was a conversation I had with Chief Pyle today. Actually, WOUV was there interviewing him. And his response makes perfect sense when you really stop and think about it. We're in a unique situation with the university and it being a university town. So the number of calls that the Athens Police Department gets complaining of the odor of marijuana, they don't get calls like that. Because who's going to call the police on someone that's sitting on their couch in their house on whatever street smoking marijuana? People just don't call. However, now go to the dorms where it's the RA's job to call the police if they smell marijuana. So I mean, they might have in one weekend, 25 or 30 calls for service, and then it's their duty to respond to that. So I mean, I don't think it's fair to say it's not a priority. I just think that the police are not called to enforce it in the same manner that the university police are called to enforce it. That also being said, if you can just put yourself in the scenario of a fest where there's, thousands of people around, they simply don't have the time to go start picking people off if they smell marijuana. That's not a smart use of time or, manpower at all. So I don't think it's fair to say it's not a priority and APD is just like, that's just not something we're going to enforce. It's a completely different nature of enforcement than what is called, what Ohio University is called upon to do.
Anything that occurred to you during that?
The question was about
Priorities.
Priorities.
How it's
So the Athens Cannabis Ordinance only directly applies to misdemeanors and only is a change to the Athens City Code. Now, that's not necessarily the end of the story, because that's what we're allowed legally to do based on the precedent set by the case in Lucas County Common Pleas Court with the Toledo Sensible Marijuana Ordinance, and set at the Ohio State Supreme Court with a few other of the city's ordinances last year. And so after all of those cases, we are allowed in Ohio to change the penalty for misdemeanors in town, including for cannabis offenses. However, that's not necessarily the end of the story. The vote on the cannabis ordinance really is putting the question not simply about the specific changes to our city ordinance, but really about how citizens feel about cannabis enforcement in town. The way I see it is really a citizen mandate that would apply not just to misdemeanor offenses, but to cannabis enforcement in general. So while it would specifically affect misdemeanors, and some of the talk that I've heard has been that you would get a $0 fine but no drug charge, what I'm seeing is that the tickets would hopefully not even ever be written, and that's in fact the reality that's going on in Toledo and in the other cities. They're just not writing the tickets. And so ideally, if our local government respects our citizen mandate, if the vote is yes, then they would simply stop prioritizing or even enforcing at all pretty much any of the cannabis offenses.
Thank you. Don, if you could write your question down so that we can, you might be sitting on it, Don. Or there's one up here. I think sorry. All right. Okay. This next one is for Caleb to answer first. Would taco help people needing medical marijuana, since now the state restricts medical marijuana?
I touched on this topic briefly before. The Athens Cannabis Ordinance is most certainly not legalization. We all need to keep that in mind. Marijuana would still be illegal, and it is also not decriminalization, and it really is just depenalization. That said, it would make the atmosphere a little bit freer for cannabis use, given that you wouldn't necessarily be facing a fine of a few $100s. And to me, really the key thing about the medical or medicinal use of cannabis as it pertains to our local cannabis ordinance and state law is that under our state law, you're only allowed to vaporize or eat extracts, and you are only allowed to get a prescription if you have one of a very small list of ailments. And cannabis has been proven as effective therapy for ailments that are not on this list, and forms of consuming cannabis that are not allowed in Ohio state law have also been proven effective as treatment with cannabis. So what I see is that there are some holes and oversights in our current state medical marijuana law that some patients might find their particular needs with medicinal cannabis are met better in ways that are not provided in our state medical law and might be more accessible under the Athens Cannabis Ordinance.
I'll just respond very briefly. And this isn't to pick on Caleb or anything, but we do have to remember that no matter, I mean, the medical marijuana and this are two separate issues, but even if TACO passes, marijuana is still illegal. I mean, this doesn't decriminalize marijuana. It's still against the law. It makes it so the penalty is much less, and it may, make people feel more comfortable using it, but we just can't decriminalize it.
Okay, next question. Considering the possibility of a citizen mandate, maybe an 80% yes vote, would this deter APD from even writing a citation in the first place? I think we've seen. Also, would the administration at OU be pushed to change their cannabis policy? Would you like to speak to that?
I definitely can't tell you what APD or OUPD would do. That would be up to their different departments and their administrators to decide. Do I think it would deter APD? Based upon the conversation I had with the chief today, he said that would be a conversation that we would have. He's not ready to make a statement like, oh yeah, if TACO passes, then we're not going to enforce it at all. It would probably be a decision made jointly between the law director and the police chief. So I can't answer that, definitely. As far as OUPD, just because OUPD would not be affected by the ordinance, I don't think that they would change what they do at all. I don't think that this would change the way they enforce it. Caleb?
Rather than speculate about what might happen, I prefer to look at what has happened in past examples in other places to kind of get an idea of what might be going on here. And in order to do that, I've done a lot of talking with people in other places where similar ordinances have been passed. Specifically, I spent some time on the phone a couple weeks ago with the law director in Toledo, and while we were speaking, he actually had some questions, and he called his head prosecutor and then called me back, and their consensus in their office was that since their ordinance passed, that they hadn't actually seen any misdemeanor marijuana citations go through, including not just the Toledo City Police Department, but also from the University of Toledo Police Department. So we can't really say for sure what's going to happen here. It's up to everybody to decide, and they can make one decision and then make another decision later. I know that's happened in Logan before. At the beginning, the Logan Police Department was writing citations under state code mostly, and now I believe that they've switched to following the city ordinance and often, or perhaps always, just not even writing a citation. And that's what's been going on in Toledo as well.
Thank you.
Including with the Toledo University Police.
Is the city going to lose money by not recovering court costs? Fairness is...
In my opinion, I don't think that the city would lose money by not recovering court costs, because the city really would not be writing these tickets in the first place. If you don't write the ticket, then you don't have to lose the money by not recouping the court costs.
I think the answer is yes. The city would lose money because under the ordinance, there are no city court costs assessed. So even if they did write the citations, the city would collect no cost.
Okay. Did we get your question done? Did we get?
Sorry.
Okay. Are there any others? All right. Well, I think we will go to the final statements, and we'll go to Tracy first.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for having me. This is my first rodeo with a forum like this, so I kind of hope it's my last, but we'll see. Again, we're not here to say vote no. We just want you to understand from the city's perspective, And from our perspective as prosecutors, the effects of this are not that great. And I understand that it's more representative of an attitude that is widely accepted across the state, and that is moving towards legalization of marijuana. And our office is not for or against that, but our fear is that some of the effects of this, unintended effects, could be detrimental, especially to the student population, who is a large part of who we prosecute. And I do also want to mention, I've already said this, but even if it's depenalized, it's still a criminal conviction. So even if you only have to pay $40 and it's no big deal, I mean, and even if you really don't care, you could rack up 10 or 11 charges, you still have these criminal convictions. It's still going to be on your record, and that just reflects poorly upon anyone, be you a student, be you, a 50-year-old person looking for a new job. If we could decriminalize marijuana, I'm sure that, we'd be talking about that right now, but that's just not the possibility. That's not the reality. It's just depenalizing it, and it's very important for everyone to understand that and understand that voting yes doesn't make it illegal. It's still illegal, and it's still our obligation to prosecute those cases. Thank you.
All right. So, as Tracy and I have both been saying this whole time, the Athens Cannabis Ordinance would not legalize marijuana. It would still be a criminal act to possess marijuana in the city of Athens. But because of the citizen mandate and because of the no fines and court costs, these tickets probably won't even be written. And even if the Ohio University Police Department does not follow the ordinance, which I believe there's good reason for them to do so, I don't believe that there will really be a problem. Students should be fine. They've been fine in Ann Arbor, they've been fine at the University of Toledo and other places where similar things have happened. And lastly, I would like to conclude by saying that the Athens Cannabis Ordinance is a citizen petition, and it's a way for citizens and voters to use our right to direct legislation as citizens. People who write laws are regular people too. We can also read them and understand them, and we are also legally allowed in Ohio to make our own and enact them by petition. And not only is the Cannabis Ordinance a statement about what we want cannabis policy to be in the city of Athens, but it's also a statement about making sure that citizens have the right to challenge government when the legislators or the courts or other bodies do not move to follow the citizens' wishes, for us to be able to show what we want and be able to change the laws to be more reflective of the will of the citizens through petitions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. So now you know. Go forth and vote one way or the other. So this concludes our program. Thank you so much to Tracy, Meek, and Caleb Brown. You're both very well prepared. And very